Welcome. My name is Amy Miller, and I am a classroom teacher in Hillsborough County, Florida. I am really excited to share this session with you. I actually felt the need to create this session because I love teaching ancient world history, and I've used the curriculum for several years. And you'll notice, I'm going to highlight a couple lessons today, and I'll get to that in just a moment. I did see a question in the chat about California. Absolutely. It is the lessons that you're going to see are available in the ancient world curriculum. And even if you're an old school ancient world curriculum user and you have even like our first or second edition, these lessons are still relevant and you're going to be able to use them and see the connections. And hopefully you'll be able to see why I chose them. Quick housekeeping, I was able to enable that chat, so thank you, thank you. And the Q&A is there as well. Ginger's going to be helping me. And the closed captions there, I believe at this point is probably old hat for us since we went through it in the introduction and period one. So the first thing I want to do is you'll notice it says introduction to the top 10 hands-on classroom activities in History Alive Ancient World. Obviously, with our time today, I'm going to have to narrow that down. However, I still am going to show what I believe to be the top 10 hands-on classroom activities are. Also, how they connect to other lessons in the unit and the curriculum, and then processing, planning, and next steps. So if you have the ability to screenshot this, because I am going to only highlight the ones that are bolded, but these are your top 10 hands-on. So when you think about your curriculum and you look through our curriculum for the year, you may feel a little bit overwhelmed with how much there is to teach and get through, especially if you have to go through every lesson using the hands-on activity. Okay. I've tried it for years. It's so rich. There's a lot. These are the top 10. So if you can do the hands-on activity, that means the whole lesson from start to finish with these 10, your students will have an amazing year and they will leave with an incredible foundation for their future social studies learning. The first one, investigating the past through inquiry, in that lesson, really the kids get into that. For those of you that are kind of familiar, that's the cave painting and the artifacts. They learn about the role of social scientists and how we learn about the past. So they find out what history detectives look like. They find out the archaeologist, the geographer, the historian. You really get into that. And so that is a great start to what that year should look like. I call them my junior social scientists. They try to figure out what it is, and then they see what the social scientists, the actual social scientists have said about it. And then we also learn that sometimes we learn things, new things that change our opinion, our ideas about what happened in the past. I'm going to take you into ancient Sumer. That lesson is rich. Oh my goodness. It's like we'll set such a great foundation. And then the ancient Egyptian pharaohs I've chose for another reason. But unlocking the secrets, achievements of Gupta, first emperor of China, those are also great hands-on. We're going to get into ancient Greece, Athens, Republic to Empire, and then finally the legacy of Rome in the modern world. I'll touch on that for a moment. That lesson really closes out the year. In fact, the game they create and play is called From Rome to Home. And it's really cool to watch the ancient world wrap up and then they end up home. And if you can't tell, this is one of my favorite curriculums. The ancient world just knocks it out of the park. Kids love this year of social
Amy,
studies.
I'm
Yes,
seeing a few questions coming in about
sure.
if the focus of this session. There are a few teachers, I believe, in here who are teaching the medieval program, and they just want to see if we'll be covering any activities from that program.
Oh, great question. So the lessons that were chosen are strictly for ancient world. However, one of the things that if you are teaching medieval world and you want to stay in here, I think one of the things you'll see is that the lessons I've chosen because they have different, some of the elements of the program than you would also find in the medieval world program. So it's completely up to you. I won't be offended if you want to leave and you want to join a different session. However, I think for some of you who are able to see the connection between what we're doing here in ancient Rome and medieval world, that might be helpful. Does that make
And
sense, Ginger?
yes.
Okay.
And then I think one person asked about eighth grade. So I just want to note that if you are interested in top lessons for the U.S. history program, the eighth grade U.S. history program, there's a separate session for that in period 3.
Yep.
Okay, hope that helps.
I know. Thank you, Ginger. Thank you for monitoring that chat for us too. All right, so let's get into this ancient Sumer lesson. So the essential question, you know, all of our lessons have an essential question. Why do historians classify ancient Sumer as a civilization? The cool part about this is that our students are going to learn the characteristics of a civilization. And then you can teach them, they can learn about it in Sumer, but then they can use those skills that they've learned and apply it to all of the other civilizations, including our modern civilization. So it's really neat for that reason. Also, they have to work together, and the interaction with that is really key. And also this lesson incorporates primary sources. So those are some of the key highlights. And we're going to dive right into this lesson so you can see what it's like. Obviously, I'm using the classroom activity slideshow. That hand, put it right over your heart. It is the heart of TCI, these hands-on activities. All right, so scientists sometimes describe a civilization as highly developed. Explain what you think it means to be highly developed and provide specific examples. This preview, this hook is a great starting point because what's going to happen is you can use this as the start and then the baseline for your students. And then you can come back to this preview at the very end and give them the same prompt and then compare the differences between the two. It is incredible to be able to do that. That's another part about this lesson that I love is the flexibility. So that's something that I created on my own, that I wanted to take this preview hook and end at the very end with this same hook, so that they could see the difference in how much knowledge they had gained. So we want to talk about what might a civilization look like? What tools might people use? How might an average person's day look like? And then I love that we start with, well, people have different opinions about what it means to be developed. Historians, however, use specific characteristics. And this is the other neat part about this, is that your students are going to have to use text-based evidence in supporting their answers. And especially in the world of social studies, the 6th grade, as much as K-5, they do wonderful things with our students. This really is probably the most academic and social studies in terms of foundational that they'll be able to set their, thinking about 6-12 and even beyond. I love this, the other piece here, the lapis lazuli, tons of middle schoolers are playing Minecraft and they get so excited when they can connect something that are games they're playing and it actually has an academic connection, so that's pretty cool. So we're going to read the introduction. As you probably saw in the first session, there was a lesson that was highlighted and you can see, you click right on that read button and you get in there. And we have lots of social studies vocabulary words in here. We're going to touch on that in just a moment. I'm going to give you a couple tips with that. Okay, so the vocabulary. One of the things that your students are going to find with these are that they're going to look at social structure and they're going to immediately think social structure like Instagram, Snapchat. So it gives you an opportunity to address some of those misconceptions early on. Culture, merchant, they might be somewhat familiar with that. Technology, but you see there are a few words in here that are strict, like a ziggurat, just strict with that in terms of that lesson. So my recommendation with the vocabulary is to teach it ahead of time. Sometimes we teach it within the lesson. I give the students an overview before so that I can ensure they are engaged and successful with what we're doing. We also have a vocabulary toolkit available to help you and support you in that. And then you may or may not be familiar with our drag and drop options, but we can put words where with there. And you see, I'm just clicking and going just so I can get through this, because this is, don't want to get bogged down with, oh gosh, there we go. Okay, let's get into this activity. All righty. So this activity is a social studies skill builder. We're combining the social studies skill of identifying primary sources and you are working with primary sources, and our content is ancient Sumer. So they're going to learn about the characteristics of a civilization. Then they're going to determine whether ancient Sumer had each characteristic by analyzing and drawing conclusions from artifacts unearthed by archaeologists. And then at the end, we're going to play the game, the last pair standing, and they get to debate that. That is like, kids love to argue with each other. So at the beginning, they read a section and they complete the spoke wheel diagram. The spoke wheel diagram is a big part of the lesson, because they're going to use the spoke wheel diagram at the beginning for just the characteristics of civilization. Then they're also going to use it at the end of the lesson for our modern civilization. So the spoke wheel diagram is going to be used throughout. It also gives you an opportunity to address any misconceptions before the lesson starts. For example, I mentioned social structure. So social structure, it gives you a chance for them to say, hey, that is, it's not socializing, it's your place in society in terms of jobs, etc. So one of the things when we facilitate lessons with TCI, if you're familiar with the program, we always have an image that shows you how to set up the classroom. This has pretty easy setup. They get a dice to use, and the dice tells them which characteristic of civilization they're going to read about first. The neat part about this is that there's a lot of reading with this lesson, but it doesn't really feel reading heavy because they're rolling a die and it gives them the next thing to read about. And so they get a little bit, those kids that are more resistant to reading, they get distracted by the gamification of it, and they buy in easier. So they're going to read about the characteristic. They're going to write notes about the characteristic. Then they're going to go around the room and examine the artifacts in the room and see which ones relate to that characteristic. And then we want to have that check there. What we want to do is we want to be the coach. Think about a batting coach. That's our role in this lesson. A batting coach, when they see a batter, they're not going to let them just swing and miss 20 times before they say anything. They're going to address it as they see it. So think about your role as a coach and helping your students be successful at the beginning and all the way through the activity. So we're going to model it. So this is how it's modeled. You pretend we rolled the dice, we landed on 2. We read section 2 and we complete the flow chart. So just what section 2, what does that look like? You'll see I've even highlighted, in helping my students fill out their graphic organizer, I've highlighted some things that they would need to know using that highlighter tool we have. Then they fill in their notes. Here's your answer key, teacher to teacher. And then we want to review the placards to find the artifacts to show evidence of a stable food supply in Sumer. Then we want to choose an artifact, write a sentence how it relates to the civic characteristics of civilization, and have your work checked before moving on to the next section. And so then our students are going to get started. And you can leave this slide up so that they see the steps and what they need to be doing. And you may want to know, well, what placards are we talking about? So I'm going to go into this overview. These are the placards that will be around the room. So for an example, the first one was stable food supply. So pretend we've read about a stable food supply, and now we are wanting to know if this artifact relates to stable food supply. So at first it says clay tablet, and your kids are going to think, well, what does that have to do with food supply? I don't even know how to read that. So we have to look at the archaeologist's notes. On this clay tablet, scribes from the Temple of Bao recorded the amount of barley or grain that workers and their families will receive from the government. And your students are going to say, oh, it has to do with food, the amount of grain that workers receive from the government. Yes. So we would write down clay tablet. And then we would go to the next placards, and you'll see that because this is a material, some of them are going to be sideways, but of course in your room, they would be set up. And so they'll go around to all of them, and they'll list the ones that relate, and then they pick one that they want to provide evidence for. And that's how that works. So we're going to use these next slides just to make sure that our kids have the reading notes completed, that they've got the content that they needed to get throughout the course of the lesson. So that's the purpose of these. And then once they have a strong foundation in the characteristics and they have their list of the artifacts that go with that, now we're going to play a game called Last Pair Standing. So this game will show us that a single artifact, think about that clay tablet, can provide evidence for more than one characteristic of civilization. So when an artifact is projected, review your reading notes to see which characteristics of civilization the artifact relates to. And when instructed, stand up if you use this artifact as evidence for one or more, and then remain standing if you use this artifact of evidence for two or more, and continue the process until one pair is the last pair standing. So for example, clay tablet. Identify the characteristics that match this artifact and then stand up. So we go through 1, and then it goes to 2, and then the last pair standing has to drag the matching characteristics to the artifact, and they have to explain how the characteristics relate to the artifact. So we already know that it's stable food supply. It mentions the government, so government's in here too. Also, scribes. So some of your students may see, oh, it mentions scribes, and scribes, government, that's part of the social structure. So it's kind of fun because some of them you get into a debate with the students, and then they get to see that, well, some of them are very, like the evidence is very clear, and some of it is a little bit of a stretch. Either way, the really cool part about it is they are completely engaged in this, and they're learning about characteristics of civilization, and they're learning about how artifacts can be evidence for more than one characteristic. And kids love to debate. So you have a great opportunity to do that with them. And so you'll go through this with each of them. And then finally, we debrief it. We talk about how artifacts help us learn about ancient people. Was ancient Sumer a civilization? What evidence do we have? What other primary or secondary sources might help historians determine whether ancient Sumer was a civilization? And then the processing. I mentioned bringing it back to the modern world. So we go back to this spoke wheel diagram, and we find or draw pictures of modern items that are examples of each characteristic of civilization. I'm going to use this as an opportunity because I want to show you in the differentiation key how you can do even more. So with your advanced learners, you can have them, after they've completed the processing activity, write a dialogue between a Sumerian person and a person living in the US today. You can have kids cut out pictures from magazines. This particular processing activity is so fun because there's so much you can do with it. And then also, I'm going to take one step back to that. You can even have them look at other civilizations in the textbook, like the Gupta or the other Mesopotamian empires, the Assyrians, Akkadians, Babylonian, Neo-Babylonian, and have them look at it from this lens as well. So it's just so fun, and there's so much differentiation that can be implemented to help every single student be successful. It is just an essential lesson from start to finish. Probably if I had to choose one lesson from the program that I think absolutely from beginning to end, it would be ancient Sumer.
Amy, quick question.
Yes.
In the slideshow, there's someone had a question about what the numbers video is used for.
Oh, right. Okay. So what that was if they found, so if they found one characteristic of civilization for the lyre, they would stand. And then once it gets to 2, if they've only used one characteristic for the lyre, they would sit. But when it gets to 2, if you have the lyre for 2 characteristics, you remain standing. And then if you have the lyre listed as an example of 3 characteristics of civilization, you remain standing. And then 4.
Awesome.
So,
thanks for the explanation.
Yeah, absolutely. So it just adds some structure to you as a teacher facilitating the lesson. Yeah. All right, so that is ancient Sumer, and what a powerful example of bringing to life something that happened thousands of years ago and making it exciting for our students. The next one I'm going to highlight for you, I chose for a different reason. This lesson I chose, it's lighter. It is also one of the ones that, so to be fair, when my students come back years after they've graduated from my class, the Sumer lesson isn't at the top of their list of what they loved about my class. However, I know as a social studies educator that that lesson is essential. This one, the ancient Egyptian pharaohs, is one of 2 that the kids remember years after they leave my class. Basically, they're going to learn about the key pharaohs from ancient Egypt, 4 of them, and they're going to analyze some art and architecture to learn. It's all about like, what did they accomplish and how did they do it? So that's kind of the fun part too, is that it's not just like, oh, they did this, they did that. How did they do it? And that is, that's fun for them to get through this. So I'm going to take you through this. This is going to be really fun because you're going to see they also get a different voice in here. So basically, the kids are going to travel down the Nile River, and I'm going to jump right into the activity on this one. They're going to take a tour of Egypt. They're going to board a felucca. You can even make a felucca in your classroom. It's really not that hard. I've done it several years. They just like the idea of in a different classroom setting. You'll notice that we have them partnered up, and we're projecting in the front. You could use a sheet as the sail. It's anything that's a little different, kids love. So we have a tour guide for this lesson. And this tour guide gets to be a voice that goes through.
Ahlan wa sahlan. Hello. Today, we will be touring the monuments of ancient Egypt. We will focus on 3 important periods of ancient Egyptian history and the accomplishments of 4 of Egypt's greatest pharaohs. Our tour will be extra special because we will be sailing along the Nile River in an Egyptian felucca. Egyptians have used these vessels to travel up and down the Nile River for thousands of years. We will leave from the city of Cairo, the capital of modern Egypt, which is located on the Nile. But before we set sail, we'll need some background information.
All right, so before we set sail, we need some background information. So what we do is we go in and we learn about the 3 periods of history, the Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom. We have, we just get some background knowledge. Takes less than 1 of your classroom periods, I would say. Get through some of the vocabulary in this lesson's pretty light. There are only a few words. The background information, there's some important information there. However, really the core of this lesson has to do with this tour down the Nile River. All right, so our first site is Giza. So we're going to listen to our tour guide, And then we're going to read section 2, but we're not going to do the reading notes yet. So I'm only going to let this play for a short amount of time.
Now that you know something about the 3 periods of ancient Egyptian history and the role of the pharaohs, let's get started.
Okay, so then he says, okay, here we are, we're in Giza. So we're going to read section 2. You can pull it up on the screen. You can have them open their text. They may be using their laptop or device in your classroom. And we're going to read about the Pharaoh Khufu. We're not going to do the reading notes that go with it yet, though. We're not going to answer questions yet. We're just going to read. So now we're going to get into this mystery. For centuries, people have wondered how the ancient Egyptians were able to build the Great Pyramid. And then we have some facts in here. Your students may want to use some of these facts when they go into the writing piece later. So just tell them, hey, if you want to write a couple of these things down, if they're really into it, you can use this. You can use this later. Generally, my kids just want to know what the mystery is. So we just go straight into it. So then they discuss with their partner of these 3 different hypotheses. And you can make the pictures look even bigger to show them. They love finding out that there actually is a show about aliens building the pyramids, that it's really not that there are, it has been created. And then you have the kids, when you call on them, or I use fingers like 1, 2, 3, which one do you think it is, you and your partner? And then I'll ask a couple kids to stand up and share why they said what they said. So call on them and ask them, and then you listen to the response or to the answer.
So, what's your hypothesis about how the Pharaoh Khufu was able to build the Great Pyramid? Most Egyptologists believe that to build the pyramid, huge blocks were cut out of the earth by large teams of workers and dragged to the site.
Okay, I love this because the kids who chose number 1 get all excited, but wait.
Near the site, there is evidence of something that could have been a straight ramp. However, they've not yet found evidence of a corkscrew-shaped ramp. Within the last 15 years, a new hypothesis has emerged. It argues that pyramids may have been built by pouring a cement-like mixture into molds directly onto the structure. Supporters of this view say that ancient Egyptians knew how to make this special cement. They also argue that by using this building method, the pharaoh would have needed only a couple of thousand workers instead of the 100,000 or more that would have been needed to cut out, drag, and place the more than 2 million huge blocks. So the mystery of the pyramids continues. Let's get back aboard the felucca. While we are sailing to our next stop, why don't you write a postcard to a friend or relative sharing what you've learned here at Giza?
Okay, so one of the other cool parts about this is, I'm a little age share for me. I'm 52. When I was in school, I learned number 1. And so while talking with my students, I get to tell them when your parents were in school, they probably learned number 1 as the hypothesis. And now we know more and we think it was number 2, but it's still a little bit of a mystery. We don't know. And then the tour guide tells them when you get back in your felucca, you're going to write a postcard to a friend or relative. So I wanted to just point out what the writing piece of this lesson looks like, because I said it was light and it is. However, we still want them to use text-based evidence. So we're going to fill in a postcard. We're going to talk about the monument, the Giza, and built by Khufu, and we want to include this information. So there are facts in there that we want them to include. And then as a teacher, you can decide how much you want to hold them accountable for that. Because like if you could because it says such as, but you could say, I want to know how big it was, what it was made of, how long it took to build, and how the Egyptian might have built it. That's 4 different facts. Or you can say, choose the facts you want to put in there. It's just, there's some differentiation there that I think is very helpful in helping all of our students be successful. Okay, so then we go to, we learn about this white chapel at Karnak. It's pretty cool. It talks about how This pharaoh built this beautiful chapel, and then another pharaoh came along and disassembled it, and then archaeologists were finding pieces of it in different places, and they put it back together. So they get out of the felucca, and this time, instead of solving the different mystery, they put together this puzzle, and they try to interpret what's going on in this puzzle, like what is it they're seeing. And then the fun part is that this right here is a loaf of bread. The kids really get into that one. So you've probably have gathered that each step along this lesson, there's something fun for them to hold on to. Hatshepsut, her temple, is another stop on the tour. And then finally, Abu Simbel and Ramses the Great. So you learn about Ramses the Great and Abu Simbel. And the neat part about this one is they had to move the temple because it was getting covered. It was flooding from a dam that was built. And so they had to figure out what to do about that. And there actually are a lot of resources that you can use to show video of how they were able to make this happen and what that looked like. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that they are in our enhancing learning. Oh, whoops, that took me back into, let's see. Yeah, so the Nova they have some cool stories about that and what that looks like.
Just a quick time check. There's about 15 minutes left.
Thank you so much, Ginger. That's really helpful. So again, they try to determine what that looks like, and then what happens. And then finally, at the very end, the writing piece for this is writing a letter about your tour of ancient Egypt. And they write a letter to their friend, and then we tell them what we want in that letter. It's also a great place to differentiate because you can have them write a postcard, another postcard as opposed to a letter. You can teach them about letter writing to friends. There are just a lot of different things you can use. Great ELA components. You could even have them make a video. One of the other things I've done with my students is have them make another stop along the Nile, and I've had them research other places you could visit along the Nile and what that would look like and what would be there. So basically, that's what that lesson encompasses. You can see you have a different voice. That part's pretty cool. You've got just getting up and moving around. The last one I'm going to really highlight with you is the rise of democracy, because this is another one. This is the second lesson that when the kids come back years later, they remember this because we use music. They find the way to make decisions. So we're going to get right into whoops, I didn't mean to do vocabulary. Let's get right into this one. So we're going to experience, this is an experiential exercise. We're going to experience what life is like in a monarchy. So the whole phase here is, so we're going to think, which songs should we listen to? How loudly should the music be played? And by the way, I do want to emphasize that these slides can be edited because for me personally, how loudly the music should be played interferes with classes around me. So we have to tone that one down. So when I do this one, it's which songs should we listen to? I don't give them the choice of how loudly it can be played, just because I care about the teachers around me and kids like things loud. So I had to make it work. So they choose a monarchy. We got a monarch here. The king is going to choose what music is played. Also, you might want to pull up Spotify, have some school appropriate songs in there that they can choose from. You make it work to fit you. But these kids, these other people, they don't have any power and they get frustrated. And then we have to debrief it with them. Oh, yes, that's right. The king dies. The prince takes over. And the prince gets to choose. But the whole thing about this is you get to reflect. So how did you feel? What could you have done if your ideas had different from those of your leaders? Nothing. And so then we go into an oligarchy where one person inherits power. I mean, a monarchy, one person inherits power. Oligarchy, it's a group. You go through the same thing, but with an oligarch. The great part about this lesson too is everything's on a click. So facilitating this lesson using our presentation tool has made a difference. I used to have to do this when I'd have to look in the book to see what the next steps were, and now everything is right here in front of everyone. So that is really helpful. And then finally, you get into a democracy, and they get to choose music. We talk about a majority. It also gives you an opportunity in terms of differentiation if you want to talk about plurality versus majority. So that's fun. And then at the very end of this, when they process it, they give report card grades. Now, what's going to happen is some of your students are going to want to kind of think, oh, bad means F, but really you want to keep them focused on how efficient was it to make the decision, how much giving equality to all people and meeting the needs of the people. So you want them to stay focused on those different parts. And then they have to justify it. Which of the 4 forms do you think deserves the highest overall grade and why? A critical thinking piece over here, using comparing and contrasting. But year after year, kids come back, probably because I make a crown for the king and I really get into it with them. It makes it memorable for them, but definitely a top 10 activity. Let me close some of these tabs I have open. Also, I want to point out when I'm closing some of these tabs that your classroom management, when you mix things up with some of these hands-on activities, they come into your class and they look forward to it. And they want to know, what are we doing? What's next? There's always going to be something going on. The Golden Age of Athens. For this one, I'm not going to take you into the lesson. I do want to tell you why it's a top 10 though, and just show you the setup for it. So it's really important. I mean, Greece is just, Athens, my goodness. So this lesson though, the Golden Age, we're looking at the cultural characteristics, and they take a walking tour. So basically you're going to have stations in your classroom. And at the stations, they're going to go to the station, they're going to learn about that particular achievement or what that looked like in Athens, and then there's a little activity that goes with it. One of them has to do with the Olympics, and instead of throwing a javelin, they throw a straw. That's pretty fun. They hold up a book for their strength. They do a jump to see how far they can jump. In the literature one, they have different parts that they play. They learn that we're all male actors, and they have different parts they play. In the station B, they get to draw. They learn about the different columns of the temples, and they get to draw them. So these stations are really cool because they're reading and learning, and they're also in a station doing an activity that's in the station. Republic to Empire is another one that I want to take a moment to point out to you, and that is, in this one, I love that the benefits of the expansion, do they outweigh the costs? Because really, when you look at society and you look at some of the decisions that are made at the government level, you really are getting kids to look at why was that decision made to expand the empire here? What was the benefit? And then what were the costs? And did the expansion outweigh the costs? And so that's why this lesson is really important to me, because it allows them to look at things through a variety of perspectives and lenses. And so they create these columns, and they have different roles they play in the group. They learn about what expansion period they were. We had to have a tip on evaluating sources. Here's an example of an inscription for the column. Again, they're using facts. They need an illustration. Then they put their column together. Notice there are 4 parts, one for each person in the group. Whoops, sorry, let me go back to that. And then they get to go around and they get to see what the other expansion periods, and they get to see what decisions were made, how did they expand it, and then what were the costs of that. And again, looking through, like, holistically through social studies, that's a really important component. So that is the last lesson that I'm going to highlight for you in my top 10. And I hope that you've seen that in the lessons I chose, there's a variety of ways in which the kids are learning. One of them was a problem-solving group work. So they worked in a group, experiential exercise, how to incorporate writing in an exciting, enthusiastic way, and a social studies skill builder. And so it doesn't have to be a one size fits all. You can take these lessons and make them your own, and they're doable. And just a little bit of extra effort on our part and facilitating it goes a long way to giving the kids the foundational skills they're going to need for social studies and for life. Remember that we support you every step of the way. Brian mentioned our TCI newsletter earlier. We have our in-app professional development. We have a Facebook group that you can connect with. It's really active too. Lots of people chime in and we really do help each other. We have an amazing community of teachers. So I'm going to click past that. And hopefully someone in your earlier session talked to you about the TCI coach program, but I'm going to take a moment to stop here and pause. Because this is how I got my start in TCI. Back in 1999, I used a lesson about the Articles of Confederation with my 8th graders. I fell in love with it. I fell in love with how my students responded to the lesson and how much they learned. That's a pretty difficult concept to teach, the Articles of Confederation. And it just had such an impact on me that I remember those moments in my classroom still to this day. So the TCI coach can be for people who are brand new and see that this curriculum makes a difference with your students, and remembering that engagement is at the heart. It gives you an opportunity to share your knowledge and make a real difference in your school and the community. Our community is dynamic. We are full of passionate people who love teaching social studies and love our students being empowered by looking at the world through a variety of lenses. So whether you've been using TCI for years or you're just getting started, the TCI Coach Program welcomes all of us who are passionate about bringing learning alive. And it's your chance to take your enthusiasm and experience to the next level, helping others discover the transformative power of TCI. So I encourage you to join us. It's a great community. It elevates our profession, and you also get a little TCI swag. so that's always a plus. I mean, I'm a teacher too, so I always love stuff, free stuff. It's amazing. Remember that you can share your fun moment with the hashtag TCI Summit 24. One thing you learned from your favorite session or one thing you liked overall. Hopefully you found some positive connections with other teachers like yourself so far this morning, and you have one more session to go. You do get entered into a drawing to win a $50 Amazon card. Oh, and you get notified at the beginning of August, which is just next week. And then finally, the last thing I'm going to ask you for the chat, how are you feeling and why did you pick that emoji? So go ahead and put it in the chat. How are you feeling about the lessons that were shared? Yay, eager. Thank you, Priscilla. Yay. Oh, I'm so glad. And you all, I promise this 6th grade curriculum is doable. It's so doable. Just think about those 10 lessons, specifically the 5 I shared with you about really making those meaningful and then fill in with the others. It's going to be great. Oh, I'm so glad to hear that, you all. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. I'm going to click on the next slide so that you see where you can go next. There's some more foundations if you want some help with that. Oh my gosh. So Loyal Fraser's doing the building a positive classroom environment. He's been with TCI for 32 years. He used to live in California. He now lives in Oklahoma. Loyal is amazing. Top activities. I mean, you have some things coming up and if you want to become a TCI coach in your school or district as well, Brian Thomas is going to be leading that one. And if you want to know more about inquiry projects to drive student learning, we have that available. Gamification, lots of fun stuff, you all. And I think you have just enough time to run to the restroom, and get into the next session because it's going to start at in 7 minutes. So thank you so much.